The morning Detroit woke up to chaos, Marcus Thompson was 3 days behind on his rent and nursing a hangover that felt like somebody was jackhammering through his skull. He'd crashed on his buddy's couch in the Cass corridor after another dead-end job interview, and the last thing he expected when he stumbled to the window was to see Mrs. Patterson from 3B literally eating the mailman. Not like chewing him out for delivering her pension check late, but actually gnawing on the dude's arm while he screamed and flailed around like a fish out of water. Marcus rubbed his eyes, figured he was still drunk, and looked again. Nope, still happening. The mailman went down hard, and Mrs. Patterson, sweet old lady who always smelled like lavender and made killer pecan pie every Thanksgiving, was crouched over him like some kind of animal, her Sunday dress covered in blood that looked way too real to be a prank. "Yo, Danny, get your butt over here right now," Marcus hollered, his voice cracking a bit because his mouth had gone drier than the Sahara. Danny Rodriguez shuffled over in his boxers and a stained Pistons jersey, scratching his belly and yawning wide enough to swallow a basketball. "Man, this better be good. I was dreaming about," he stopped mid-sentence, his jaw dropping as he caught sight of the scene unfolding on Jefferson Avenue. "Holy crap, is that Mrs. Patterson? Is she eating Gary?" They both pressed their faces against the grimy window like kids watching a car crash, except this wasn't some fender bender, this was straight-up horror movie stuff going down in broad daylight. More people were stumbling out of the apartment building across the street, but something was off about the way they moved, all jerky and wrong, like puppets with half their strings cut. Their skin looked gray, almost greenish in the morning light, and their eyes, man, their eyes were just empty, like somebody had scooped out everything human and left nothing but hunger behind. Danny grabbed his phone off the coffee table, nearly knocking over 3 empty beer bottles and a pizza box from 2 nights ago. "I'm calling 911, this is insane, we gotta get cops down here or animal control or somebody who knows what the heck is going on." He jabbed at his screen, then frowned, jabbed again, then started shaking his phone like that would magically make it work. "Dude, I got no service, like completely nothing, not even 1 bar." Marcus pulled out his own phone, an ancient iPhone with a cracked screen he'd been meaning to replace for 6 months, and got the same result. No service, no Wi-Fi, just a stupid emergency calls only message that seemed pretty ironic considering they were literally trying to make an emergency call. From somewhere outside, maybe a few blocks away, they heard gunshots. Pop pop pop, then a whole bunch more, like 4th of July came early and forgot to bring the fireworks, just brought the terrifying soundtrack instead. "We gotta get out of here, man, like right now," Marcus said, already moving away from the window and looking around the cramped studio apartment for anything that could pass as a weapon. He settled on Danny's aluminum baseball bat, the one he kept by the door ever since his car got broken into last spring. Danny was nodding, his face gone pale under his normally tan complexion, and he started throwing on jeans and sneakers with the kind of speed usually reserved for when his mom called to say she was stopping by and the place was a disaster. They could hear commotion in the hallway now, doors slamming, people shouting, somebody crying, and underneath it all, this weird moaning sound that made the hair on the back of Marcus's neck stand straight up. It sounded hungry, if hunger could make a sound, desperate and mindless in getting closer. Marcus crept to the door and looked through the peephole just as Mr. Chen from down the hall lurched past, except Mr. Chen didn't live here anymore. Marcus was pretty sure, the dude had moved out like a month ago, and also Mr. Chen's throat looked like something had torn a chunk out of it, and he was definitely not walking like someone who was okay. "Yo, the hallway's compromised, we can't go that way," Marcus whispered, using compromised like they were in some kind of military operation instead of trapped in a crummy apartment while the world apparently decided to end on a random Tuesday morning. Danny had moved to his fire escape window, yanking it open and letting in the sounds of the city losing its mind, sirens wailing from every direction, more gunshots, car alarms, screams, and that constant, awful moaning that seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. "Fire escape's our best bet. We can get down to the alley, cut through to where I parked my truck," Danny said, already climbing out onto the rusty metal platform that probably hadn't been inspected since the Reagan administration. Marcus followed, gripping the bat so hard his knuckles went white, and trying not to look down because he'd never been great with heights, and adding that fear to the whole zombie apocalypse situation seemed like overkill. They made it down one level before they ran into trouble, specifically Mrs. Kowalski from the second floor, who had apparently turned into one of those things and was now blocking the next platform down, swiping at them with hands that had lost 2 fingers somewhere along the way. Danny kicked out hard, catching her in the chest and sending her tumbling backward through her own open window, and they didn't stick around to see if she'd get back up, just kept moving, scrambling down the fire escape like their lives depended on it, which they absolutely did. They hit the alley running, and Marcus nearly wiped out on a pile of garbage bags that had split open and spilled rotting food everywhere, which somehow smelled better than the death stench that was starting to hang over everything. Danny's truck, a beat-up Ford F-150 with more rust than paint, was parked half a block away on a side street, and they sprinted for it like Olympic athletes, if Olympic athletes were running from flesh-eating monsters instead of for gold medals. 3 of those things, those zombies, or whatever the heck they were, stumbled out from between 2 parked cars, and Marcus didn't even think, just swung the bat with everything he had. It connected with the first one's head with a sound like a watermelon dropping on concrete, and the thing went down hard and didn't get back up. The other 2 kept coming, and Danny had pulled out his pocket knife, which seemed about as useful as bringing a toothpick to a gunfight, but he stabbed one in the eye and it finally stopped moving. They piled into the truck, Danny fumbling with his keys and dropping them twice before managing to get them in the ignition, and Marcus was hollering go, 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 like they were in some kind of action movie, because apparently that's what you yell when zombies are literally grabbing at your door handle. The engine turned over, thank God, and Danny floored it, clipping a zombie that had stumbled into the street and sending it rolling over the hood like a gruesome hood ornament before it fell off somewhere behind them. The streets were absolute chaos, cars abandoned in the middle of intersections, people running in every direction, some being chased, some doing the chasing, and it was getting harder and harder to tell who was still human and who had turned into something else entirely. Where are we even going? Marcus shouted over the sounds of destruction, watching through the side mirror as their neighborhood, the place he'd lived for 3 years, turned into something out of a nightmare. Danny's hands were shaking on the steering wheel, his knuckles white and his eyes wide, but he kept driving, swerving around obstacles and crunching over debris. My sister, we gotta get to my sister, she's over in Dearborn with her kids, we can't just leave her. Marcus nodded, because what else were you gonna do, abandon family when the world was ending? That wasn't how they rolled, even if driving across a city that was actively falling apart seemed like a suicide mission. They made it maybe 2 miles before they hit gridlock, cars packed so tight you couldn't squeeze a piece of paper between them, and absolutely nobody was moving because most of the drivers had either abandoned their vehicles or become zombie chow. Danny laid on the horn like that would magically clear a path, but all it did was draw attention from a group of maybe 15 or 20 of those things that had been milling around an overturned bus. They turned toward the sound, all at once, like a hive mind, and started shambling toward the truck with that relentless, creepy determination. Plan B, we're hoofing it, Danny said, killing the engine and grabbing his emergency kit from behind the seat, a backpack with water bottles, some granola bars, a flashlight, and a first aid kit that seemed wildly inadequate for the current situation. Marcus still had the bat, and he'd grabbed a tire iron from the truck bed, giving Danny a real weapon instead of that useless pocket knife. They took off on foot, sticking to the sidewalk and trying not to draw attention, which was easier said than done when every other step crunched on broken glass or kicked aside some piece of debris. They saw things during that run across town that Marcus knew would give him nightmares for the rest of his life, however long that turned out to be. A cop, still in uniform, feasting on what looked like another cop. A kid, couldn't have been more than 8 or 9, wandering alone and crying for his mom while 3 of those things closed in on him from different directions. Danny started toward the kid, but Marcus grabbed his arm, hating himself even as he did it, and pulled him back. We can't save everybody, man, we gotta stay alive if we're gonna help your sister. They heard the kid's screams cut off behind them, and Danny's face went hard, his jaw clenched so tight Marcus thought he might crack his teeth, but he kept moving forward. They cut through a shopping center where people had obviously tried to loot supplies before everything went completely sideways, the front windows of a Target smashed in and bodies, both dead and undead, scattered around like some kind of twisted clearance sale. They grabbed what they could, Marcus snagging a hunting knife in a sheath and some bottles of water, Danny finding a crowbar that looked a lot more useful than the tire iron. A zombie in a Target employee vest lurched out from behind a checkout counter, and Marcus put it down with the bat, trying not to think about how that used to be a person, maybe somebody's dad or brother or best friend. They made it to Dearborn just after noon, though the sun was struggling to punch through a haze of smoke from dozens of fires burning across the city, nobody left to put them out or even try. Danny's sister, Jennifer, lived in a little ranch house on a quiet street that didn't look quiet anymore, several cars up on the lawn across the street and what looked like blast marks on the pavement from some kind of explosion. They crept up to the house, and Marcus covered the back while Danny went to the front door, knocking in some kind of pattern that must have meant something because a few seconds later the door cracked open and Jennifer's face appeared, streaked with tears and makeup and looking about 10 years older than the last time Marcus had seen her at a barbecue back in July. Thank God, I didn't think anybody was coming, I thought we were gonna die here," she sobbed, pulling Danny inside and then waving frantically for Marcus to come around. He did a quick sweep of the backyard, saw one of those things tangled up in a chain link fence trying to claw its way through, and jogged to the front door. Inside, the house was dark, all the curtains drawn and furniture pushed against the windows like barricades. Jennifer's two kids, Emma and Tyler, were huddled in the hallway with another woman Marcus didn't recognize, younger than Jennifer, maybe mid-20s, with blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail and the kind of look in her eyes that said she'd seen some serious stuff in the last few hours. "This is Becky, our neighbor from 2 doors down. She came running when those things attacked her boyfriend," Jennifer explained, her voice shaking. Becky gave a little wave, clutching what looked like a kitchen knife with a death grip. Tyler, who was 6, was crying quietly, and Emma, 10 years old and trying to be brave, had her arm around him. Danny scooped both kids into a hug, and Marcus could see his buddy's whole body shaking with relief that they were okay, at least for now. "We need to get somewhere safer, this house isn't gonna hold if a bunch of those things decide to push hard against these windows," Marcus said, doing a quick assessment of their defenses and finding them pretty lacking. "Where's safer?" "The whole city's gone crazy, the news before the TV stopped working was saying it's like this everywhere, not just Detroit, Chicago's gone, New York, LA, everywhere," Jennifer said, wrapping her arms around herself like she was trying to hold it together through sheer force of will. Marcus and Danny exchanged a look, because if this was everywhere, that meant there was no cavalry coming, no National Guard rolling in to save the day, no safe zone to evacuate to. They were on their own, and that realization hit like a punch to the gut. "Okay, so we can't stay here, but we gotta be smart about where we go," Danny said, shifting into problem-solving mode because the alternative was panic, and panic would get them all killed. "We need somewhere defensible, with supplies, maybe high up where those things can't get to us easy." Becky spoke up for the first time, her voice stronger than Marcus expected. "There's an old warehouse by the river, the one they were converting into lofts before the developer went bankrupt. My ex worked construction there, it's only half finished but it's got concrete walls, metal doors, and it's 4 stories up with only 2 stairwells. If we could secure those, we'd have a real chance." Marcus considered it, running through the logistics in his head. It was about 3 miles from where they were, which meant a dangerous trek through zombie-infested streets with 2 kids in tow, but staying here was a death sentence, and he didn't have any better ideas. "All right, we gear up with whatever we can carry, food, water, weapons, first aid stuff, and we move fast and quiet. We stick together, nobody wanders off, nobody plays hero, we just get there alive. Everybody cool with that?" They all nodded, even the kids, and Marcus felt a weird surge of something that might have been pride or might have been terror, hard to tell when your adrenaline was redlining. They spent 20 minutes gathering supplies, filling backpacks and a couple of reusable shopping bags with canned goods, water bottles, a can opener, flashlights, batteries, some blankets, and anything else that seemed useful. Jennifer had her husband's golf clubs in the garage, and while Marcus had never understood the point of golf, he had to admit a 9-iron made a decent skull crusher. Danny found a nail gun in the garage with a whole box of nails, and while it wasn't exactly a firearm, it could do some damage at close range. They armed themselves as best they could, and Marcus did one final check to make sure everybody knew the plan. They left through the back door, moving in a tight group with Danny on point, Marcus bringing up the rear, and the women and kids sandwiched in the middle. The streets were like something out of a post-apocalyptic video game, except the graphics were way too realistic and there was no reset button if you died. They moved from cover to cover, hiding behind cars and dumpsters, and once, memorably, inside a newspaper distribution box when a huge group of zombies shambled past, maybe 50 or 60 of them, all heading in the same direction like they'd gotten some kind of silent summons. Emma was breathing so hard Marcus thought she might hyperventilate, and he put a hand on her shoulder, trying to be reassuring even though he was scared out of his mind himself. They were about halfway to the warehouse when they ran into other survivors, a group of 4 guys who looked like they'd been through a war zone, covered in blood and grime and carrying an assortment of weapons that ranged from a pistol with probably no ammo to a samurai sword that looked like it came from a mall kiosk. The guy with the sword, a tall white dude with a shaved head and neck tattoos, stepped into their path and held up a hand. "Hold up, where you folks headed?" His tone wasn't exactly friendly, and Marcus felt his grip tighten on the bat. Danny stepped forward, trying to keep things calm. "Just trying to find somewhere safe, got kids with us, not looking for trouble." The bald guy looked them over, his eyes lingering on the backpacks full of supplies, and Marcus didn't like the calculating look that crossed his face. "Yeah, well, safe is in short supply these days, but supplies aren't, if you know what I mean. Maybe you folks could share some of what you're carrying, like a toll for passing through our territory." Territory, like they'd set up some kind of fiefdom in the last 6 hours while civilization collapsed. Marcus stepped up next to Danny, making it clear they weren't just going to roll over. "Not how this is gonna work, man. We're all trying to survive here, no need to make it harder on each other." The tension ratcheted up about 10 notches, the bald guy's friends spreading out a little, and Marcus was doing math in his head, figuring they were outnumbered, but they had the element of surprise and he was pretty sure most of these guys were all talk and no action, the kind who acted tough but folded when things got real. Before it could escalate into violence, the decision got made for them. A zombie, attracted by their voices, came around the corner of a building, then another, then a whole bunch more, like they'd been drawn by the commotion. Both groups forgot about their standoff real quick and focused on the immediate threat of a dozen flesh-eating monsters shambling toward them with their arms outstretched and their mouths open in that horrible, hungry moan. "Move, move!" Danny shouted, and everybody scattered, the bald guy and his crew going one way while Marcus's group went the other, running flat out with the kids struggling to keep up. Tyler was crying again, and Jennifer scooped him up even though he was way too big for her to carry comfortably, but mothers apparently got superhuman strength when their kids were in danger. They ducked into an alley, then through a hole in a fence, emerging in what used to be a park but was now just a burned-out shell. The playground equipment melted and twisted from a fire that must have raged through recently. They didn't stop, couldn't stop, because those things were still behind them, not fast but relentless, never getting tired, never giving up. Marcus's lungs were burning and his legs felt like jello, but he kept pushing, kept moving, because the alternative was becoming one of those things, and he'd rather die than let that happen. The warehouse finally came into view, a big concrete block of a building with broken windows on the upper floors and weeds growing through cracks in the parking lot, looking like the least appealing real estate in the world but also looking like salvation. The main entrance was chained shut, but Becky led them around to a side door she said the construction workers used, and thank God it was unlocked, the door swinging open with a rusty squeal that sounded way too loud in the eerie quiet. They piled inside, Danny and Marcus immediately turning to secure the door, shoving a heavy metal shelving unit against it and wedging it tight. The ground floor was a mess of construction debris, sawhorses and 2x4s and bags of concrete mix that had hardened into useless lumps. But there was a stairwell, just like Becky said, and they climbed to the second floor, then the third, putting distance between themselves and ground level, where most of the zombies seemed to operate. The third floor was partially finished, with drywall up in some sections and exposed studs in others, but there was actual floor instead of concrete, and windows that still had glass, and even a bathroom that might work if the water was still running, which seemed like a luxury Marcus had never appreciated before. They did a sweep of the whole floor, making sure nothing was hiding in the shadows, and found it blessedly empty. There was even some furniture left behind by the construction crew, a card table and some folding chairs, a mini fridge that didn't work, and a coffee maker that probably never would again. They barricaded the stairwell door with everything heavy they could find, creating a choke point that would be hard for those things to get through, then did the same for the second stairwell on the opposite side of the building. Once they'd secured their position as best they could, everybody kind of collapsed, the adrenaline draining away and leaving nothing but exhaustion and shock. Jennifer was crying quietly, holding both her kids close, and Danny sat next to them, his arm around his sister, looking more stressed than Marcus had ever seen him. Becky had moved to a window and was staring out at the city, or what was left of it, smoke rising from 100 different fires, the streets below crawling with those things. "Is this real? Like, is this actually happening?" she asked nobody in particular, her voice small and lost. Marcus didn't have an answer, because yeah, it was real, but his brain still hadn't fully processed that the world he woke up to this morning was just gone, replaced by this nightmare. They rationed out some water and granola bars, nobody really hungry but knowing they needed to keep their strength up. Tyler had finally stopped crying and fallen into an exhausted sleep on his mom's lap, and Emma was nodding off too, her head on Danny's shoulder. The adults sat in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts, probably thinking about the people they'd left behind, wondering if their parents, siblings, friends were still alive out there somewhere or if they'd become part of the shambling hordes. Marcus thought about his mom, who lived up in Flint and who he hadn't called in like 2 weeks because he'd been busy with his own drama, and now he might never get the chance to talk to her again, never get to say he was sorry for being a crappy son who only called when he needed something. "We should set up a watch schedule, make sure somebody's always awake in case those things find a way in," Danny said eventually, his voice rough with fatigue. Marcus nodded, knew his buddy was right even though every cell in his body was screaming for sleep. They worked out a rotation, 2 people on watch at all times, 4-hour shifts, Marcus and Becky taking the first one while Danny and Jennifer got some rest with the kids. Marcus positioned himself by the stairwell they'd barricaded, listening for any sounds of movement below, while Becky took the window, watching the street. The sun was starting to set, painting the smoke-filled sky in shades of orange and red that would have been beautiful if they didn't represent the city burning, civilization crumbling, everything they'd known turning to ash. "You doing okay?" Marcus asked Becky after a while, keeping his voice low so he didn't wake the others. She laughed, but there was no humor in it, just a sharp, bitter edge. "My boyfriend got torn apart in front of me this morning, the world ended before lunch, and I'm trapped in an abandoned building surrounded by zombies. So yeah, I'm just peachy." Marcus winced, figured he deserved that for asking a stupid question. "Sorry, that was dumb. I just meant. I don't know what I meant. None of us signed up for this." She turned away from the window, and in the fading light he could see tear tracks on her cheeks. "His name was Scott, we'd been together for 2 years, we're talking about getting engaged. He went outside to check on a noise and they just swarmed him, came out of nowhere. I just ran and left him screaming, and I don't know if that makes me smart or the worst person alive." Marcus moved closer, not touching her but near enough that she wasn't alone. "It makes you a survivor, and there's no shame in that. You couldn't have saved him, you would have just died too, and then you wouldn't be here now helping us keep these kids safe. Scott would probably want you to live, right? So honor that, stay alive, don't let those things win." It was the kind of speech that probably sounded better in movies, but Becky nodded, wiping her eyes and taking a shaky breath. "Yeah, okay. Yeah. We stay alive, we fight, we don't give up." She said it like a mantra, like if she repeated it enough it would become true, and Marcus hoped like hell she was right. The night was long and filled with sounds that would fuel nightmares, the moaning of zombies echoing through the streets, occasional screams from people who weren't as lucky as they were, distant gunfire that became less and less frequent as the hours wore on. Marcus's shift ended and Danny took over, then Jennifer partnered with Becky, then it was back to Marcus again as dawn started to break over a city that looked nothing like the Detroit he'd known. From their vantage point on the third floor, they could see the scope of the disaster, entire neighborhoods that looked deserted, others where fires still burned unchecked, and everywhere, those things wandering aimlessly until something caught their attention and turned them into single-minded killing machines. They spent the next day fortifying their position, using construction materials to reinforce the barricades and create a second line of defense in case the first one failed. Danny got the nail gun working and secured sheets of plywood over some of the windows, leaving a few open for ventilation and visibility but making it harder for anything to get in. They found a stash of bottled water in what used to be the construction foreman's office, along with some protein bars and a half-empty bottle of whiskey that they agreed to save for emergencies or celebrations, whichever came first. Emma and Tyler were remarkably resilient, the way kids could be, adapting to their new reality faster than the adults. They played quiet games in the corner, and Emma even found some chalk and was drawing on the concrete walls, creating a little bit of normalcy in the chaos. On the third day, they heard voices from outside, actual human voices, and Marcus carefully looked out a window to see a group of about 8 people moving down the street, heavily armed and looking organized, not like random survivors but like they had a purpose. He called Danny over, and they watched as the group cleared zombies with efficiency, using suppressed weapons and coordinating their movements like a trained unit. Military maybe? Or cops? Danny wondered, and Marcus shrugged. Didn't really matter who they were as long as they were friendly. They made a quick decision and Marcus leaned out the window, waving his arms and calling down. "Hey! Up here! We're survivors, we got kids with us." The group stopped, weapons coming up and pointing in their direction for a heart-stopping moment before the leader, a black woman with short hair and tactical gear, lowered her rifle and signaled to the others. "How many of you?" she called back, her voice carrying that note of command that said she was used to being in charge. 6, 2 adults, 2 kids, 2 more adults. "We're not infected, we've been holed up here for 3 days." There was a brief consultation among the group below, then the woman nodded. "We're coming up, but we're gonna need to verify you're clean, standard protocol, don't make any sudden moves." Marcus relayed that to the others, and they arranged themselves in the middle of the room, hands visible, weapons set aside but within reach because they weren't stupid enough to go completely defenseless. The group cleared the building floor by floor, professional and thorough, before finally reaching the third floor. The woman entered first, her rifle lowered but ready, scanning the room before relaxing slightly. "I'm Lieutenant Reeves, Michigan National Guard, or what's left of it. This is what remains of my unit." She gestured to the 7 people with her, a mix of men and women in various states of military gear and civilian clothing. "We've been trying to locate survivors and establish a safe zone, but it's been rough going. The infection spread faster than anything we'd ever trained for, and command structure broke down within the first day." She looked at each of them in turn, her eyes lingering on the kids with something that might have been sadness or determination or both. They spent the next hour sharing information, and what Reeves told them wasn't encouraging. The outbreak had started simultaneously in multiple major cities across the country and around the world, too coordinated to be natural, though whether it was terrorism or some kind of biological weapon gone wrong, nobody knew. The infection spread through bites and other fluid contact, and death was quick, reanimation quicker. The military had tried to establish quarantine zones but they'd been overrun almost immediately, too many infected, not enough personnel, and too many people panicking and breaking containment. Most major population centers were considered lost, though there were rumors of safe zones in more rural areas, places where the population density was low enough that they'd been able to contain the spread. "We're heading north, trying to make it to a bunker facility near Grayling. It's remote and well-stocked, designed for exactly this kind of scenario. We've got room for more people if you want to come with us, but I gotta be straight with you, it's a dangerous trip, about 150 miles through zombie-infested territory, and we've lost people along the way." Reeves laid it out plainly, no sugarcoating, and Marcus appreciated that she was treating them like adults who could handle the truth. They huddled up to discuss it, and the consensus was pretty unanimous. Staying here was just delaying the inevitable. Supplies would run out, the horde would eventually break through, and they'd die in this warehouse surrounded by construction debris and broken dreams. At least heading north gave them a chance, a real shot at survival instead of just postponing death. They packed up everything useful, distributed weapons and supplies more evenly now that they had experienced fighters with them, and prepared to move out. Reeves's second in command, a gruff guy named Sergeant Miller who looked like he'd wrestled bears for fun before the apocalypse, gave them a quick crash course in zombie combat. Headshots only, destroying the brain is the only thing that stops them for good. Don't get surrounded, don't make unnecessary noise, and if someone gets bit, you tell us immediately, because we can't risk them turning and taking others with them. That last part was delivered while looking directly at Jennifer and her kids, making it clear that even children weren't exempt from the rules, and Jennifer pulled them closer, her face going pale. They left the warehouse as a group of 14, moving in a tactical formation that Reeves directed with hand signals and whispered commands. Marcus found himself in the middle of the pack with Emma and Tyler, his bat replaced with a more efficient crowbar and a hunting knife on his belt. The streets were a maze of abandoned vehicles and wandering zombies, and they had to take several detours to avoid large groups, moving slowly and carefully, sometimes freezing in place when one of those things got too close, holding their breath until it shambled past. They made it about 5 miles the first day, holing up in a fortified house that Reeves's group had scouted on a previous run, and settling in for another tense night of watches and nightmares. The journey north took 11 days that felt like 11 years, each one filled with close calls and desperate fights, with loss and small victories. They lost Private Gomez on day 4 when a zombie they thought was dead suddenly grabbed his ankle and bit clean through his boot, the infection spreading so fast they had to put him down before he turned, and they buried him in a shallow grave while Jennifer covered the kid's eyes. They picked up 3 more survivors on day 6, a middle-aged couple and their teenage daughter who'd been living in a grocery store surrounded by zombies, running out of food and hope until Reeves's group showed up like the cavalry. The daughter, a quiet girl named Ashley, attached herself to Emma, and the two became inseparable, giving each other strength. Marcus discovered things about himself during those 11 days, things he never would have learned in his old life of job interviews and hangovers. He learned he could kill without hesitation when it meant protecting people he cared about, putting down zombies with mechanical efficiency that would have horrified him before but now just felt necessary. He learned he was braver than he thought, volunteering for dangerous supply runs and taking point when Reeves needed someone to check if a building was clear. He learned that Danny, his slacker buddy who'd barely been able to hold down a job at a call center, had the makings of a real leader, keeping morale up and always thinking 3 steps ahead about what they'd need next. Becky turned out to be a crack shot with the rifle they gave her, some natural talent she'd never had reason to discover before, and she saved Marcus's life on day 8 when a zombie came at him from a blind spot and she took it down with a headshot from 30 yards away. Jennifer showed a fierce protectiveness that made her dangerous in the best possible way, a mama bear who'd go through hell and back for her kids and anyone else under her protection. Even Tyler and Emma showed courage, staying quiet when they needed to, following instructions without complaint, and not slowing the group down despite their short legs and understandable fear. They ran into other groups of survivors, some friendly, some hostile, and learned quickly to assess threats and avoid conflict when possible, engage when necessary. Reeves was a brilliant tactician, getting them out of more than one situation that seemed hopeless, and Marcus developed a deep respect for her leadership. Sergeant Miller was the muscle, the guy who could take down 3 zombies with his bare hands if needed, and who carried Tyler on his shoulders when the kid was too tired to walk, revealing a soft side he tried to hide behind gruff commands. The rest of the unit, Corporal Jackson, Specialist Williams, Private First Class Davis, and Private Rodriguez, all became family during those 11 days, bonds forged in fire and survival that ran deeper than anything Marcus had experienced before. They finally reached the bunker facility on day 12, exhausted, battered, but alive, all 17 of them, including the stragglers they'd picked up along the way. The facility was everything Reeves had promised, a Cold War-era installation built into the side of a hill, with heavy blast doors and enough supplies to last 100 people for 6 months, maybe longer if they were careful. There were other survivors already there, about 30 of them, in a command structure led by a Colonel Hendricks who'd gotten word out to National Guard units across the state to rally there. It wasn't perfect, wasn't a return to the world they'd lost, but it was safe, and that was more than Marcus had dared hope for when he'd watched Mrs. Patterson eating the mailman 12 days ago. They settled into routines, everyone assigned tasks and duties, because idle hands led to thinking too much about what they'd lost, who hadn't made it, the life that was never coming back. Marcus worked on fortifications, using construction skills he'd picked up from odd jobs to help reinforce the perimeter. Danny coordinated supply inventory, his organizational skills finally finding a useful outlet. Jennifer started a school for the kids, because they needed structure and normalcy in education, even at the end of the world. Becky joined the security rotation, her shooting skills too valuable to waste. They were building something new from the ashes of the old world, a community that valued strength and compassion in equal measure, where everyone contributed and everyone mattered. 3 months in, Marcus found himself on guard duty one night with Reeves, watching the forest beyond the fence line for any signs of the infected. They'd cleared the immediate area pretty thoroughly, but stragglers still wandered through occasionally, drawn by sounds or lights or whatever it was that motivated their rotting brains. "You did good out there, during the journey," Reeves said, not looking at him, her eyes on the tree line. "A lot of people froze up or fell apart, but you stepped up, kept your head, saved lives. That takes real courage." Marcus shrugged, uncomfortable with praise but also kind of proud. "Didn't really have a choice, you know. It was step up or die, and I wasn't ready to die." "That's where you're wrong," Reeves said, finally turning to look at him. "Plenty of people chose death, gave up, let the fear win. You chose to fight, chose to protect people, chose courage even when you were terrified. That's not nothing, Marcus, that's everything." They stood in companionable silence after that, and Marcus thought about how far he'd come from the guy nursing a hangover on Danny's couch, worried about rent and job interviews like those were real problems. He'd discovered reserves of strength and bravery he never knew he possessed, had become someone his younger self wouldn't recognize, and honestly, that was okay, because his younger self had been kind of a mess. The radio crackled to life, a rare occurrence that always drew attention because working communications were hard to come by. Colonel Hendricks's voice came through, addressing the whole facility. "Attention all personnel, we've just received confirmed communication from a government continuity site in Colorado. I repeat, we have confirmed that elements of the government survived and are coordinating recovery efforts. They're establishing safe zones across the country and asking all military and civilian survivors to maintain their positions and prepare for integration into a larger network. This isn't over, people, we're going to rebuild, we're going to take back our country, and we're going to survive this." The announcement sparked a wave of emotion throughout the facility, people crying, hugging, some cheering, others just sitting in stunned silence. Marcus felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he'd been carrying since that first morning, the fear that they were alone, that humanity was finished, that there was no future beyond day-to-day survival. If the government was still functioning, if there was a plan, a real plan to rebuild and recover, then maybe, just maybe, they had a shot at something more than existence, at actually living again. He thought about all the people who hadn't made it, who'd died in those first chaotic days or during the journey north, and he promised himself he'd make their sacrifice mean something, would help build a world worth surviving for. Danny found him after his guard shift ended, and they sat on the steps outside the bunker entrance, watching the sun come up over a world that was broken but not beaten. "You ever think about what you're gonna do, you know, after?" Danny asked, and Marcus knew he meant after they'd won, after the zombies were cleared out, after some semblance of normal returned. Marcus thought about it, really thought about it, and realized his old dreams of a decent job and a nice apartment seemed incredibly small now. "I think I want to help people, like really help them, maybe work with Reeves if she's building some kind of security force, or help with reconstruction, I don't know. Just something that matters, you know?" Danny nodded, a smile crossing his face. "Yeah, man, I get that. I was thinking maybe teaching, working with Jennifer and the kids, because they're gonna rebuild this world, and we gotta make sure they're ready for it, that they know not just how to survive but how to live. They sat there as the sun climbed higher, burning away the morning mist, and Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, maybe ever. Hope. Real, genuine hope that they were going to make it, that humanity was going to claw its way back from the brink, and that he was going to be part of that fight, that recovery, that future. The weeks turned into months, and the months into a year, and slowly, painfully, they started taking back ground from the infected. The Colorado government site coordinated with other survivor groups, sharing information about the infection, developing strategies to clear areas and establish safe zones, even working on a cure or vaccine using infected tissue from the early days. The bunker in Grayling became a regional hub, with Marcus and others from Reeves's original group taking leadership roles in the expansion. They cleared nearby towns, established farms and supply lines, created something that started to resemble civilization again, though it was harder and rougher around the edges than what they'd lost. Marcus led dozens of missions into zombie-held territory, each one dangerous, each one necessary, and he lost count of how many of those things he put down, how many times he nearly died, how many close calls that turned into stories told around campfires at night. He also couldn't count the number of people he helped save, survivors found hiding in basements and attics and rooftops, waiting for rescue that they'd almost given up on. Each rescue felt like a small victory against the darkness, proof that humanity was resilient, that they could adapt and overcome even something as catastrophic as the zombie apocalypse. Emma and Tyler grew up in this new world, never forgetting what they'd lost but adapting to what they had, becoming symbols of hope for everyone who remembered the old world and everyone who'd only known the struggle. Emma talked about becoming a doctor, wanting to help people the way the medical team at the bunker had helped survivors, and Tyler, despite everything he'd seen, still managed to be a goofy kid who made people laugh and reminded them that joy was still possible. Jennifer watched her children grow with a mix of pride and sorrow, wishing their father had survived to see the amazing people they were becoming, but knowing he'd be proud of how she'd protected them, how she'd given them a future when none seemed possible. Becky became one of the most respected members of the security force, her skills and dedication earning her a leadership position under Reeves, and she honored Scott's memory by living fiercely and protecting others the way she wished she could have protected him. Danny married one of the survivors they'd picked up along the way, a woman named Patricia who'd lost everything but refused to lose herself, and together they built a life that was different from what they'd imagined before but no less meaningful. Reeves eventually became the regional commander for the Northern Michigan Recovery Zone, her tactical brilliance and genuine care for her people making her the obvious choice, and she never forgot the ragtag group of survivors she'd found in that warehouse, always saying they were proof that ordinary people could do extraordinary things when pushed. 5 years after that morning when Marcus woke up to the world ending, he stood on the walls of what they now called New Grayling, a thriving community of over 2,000 people, and looked out at farmland that had been reclaimed, forests that had been cleared of infected, roads that were being rebuilt. There were still zombies out there, probably always would be in small numbers, lurking in remote areas and abandoned cities, but they'd been pushed back, contained, reduced from an extinction-level threat to a manageable problem. Humanity had survived, had fought back, and was rebuilding, not trying to recreate the old world but forging something new, hopefully something better. Pretty amazing, isn't it? Becky said, joining him on the wall, her rifle slung over her shoulder, her face older and harder than it had been but also more at peace. Marcus nodded, couldn't really put into words what it meant to see this, to have been part of making it happen. We did this, all of us. We looked at the end of the world and said no, not today, not ever. Becky smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. Damn right we did, and we're gonna keep doing it, gonna keep fighting, keep building, until there's nothing left of those things and everything left of us. They stood together in silence, two survivors among thousands, ordinary people who'd found extraordinary courage when unknown beings approached their city, when everything fell apart, when hope seemed lost. They'd discovered they were stronger than they knew, braver than they believed, more resilient than they'd imagined, and that discovery had made all the difference. The world had ended, but they hadn't, and in that survival, in that refusal to give up, they'd found not just the courage to fight, but the strength to rebuild, and the hope to believe in a future worth fighting for. The sun set over New Grayling, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and Marcus thought that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay, because they'd proven that even when faced with the unthinkable, the human spirit could endure, could adapt, could overcome, and most importantly, could find the courage to keep going, one day at a time, together.